Chapter 13, Parts 1 as 2. Chapter 13, Revelations. Part 1, Gorgut's Stronghold, the Green Coast, Kronus. The great rocket, the pride and joy of the surviving mech boys, rose high up in the sky. It was a pile of scrap-leaking fuel. Gorguts gave it one look and shook his head. At least the boys painted it properly in red, to be faster, and purple, to be sneaky-like. The war boss sniffed the air, and the acrid stench of rocket fuel filled his lungs. "Good work, now get on and make sure it works," he rumbled, wondering how to climb up himself. It took a few piles of scarp, a few hours of mech boys hammering on it, and 5 squigs to punch together an ugly crane. Gorguts looked suspiciously at the contraption and prayed to Gork and Mork that he would die in glorious combat, instead of mech boys' mistake. It took 30 boys working the crane to lift him enough that he could get into the cockpit. That day, Gorguts learned he didn't have a taste for swinging on a chain like a squig ready to be roasted. It was hard to get through a too small of an opening, but Gorguts was a crafty war boss and managed if barely. A pilot, a survivor from a shot-down ship, waited for him, puffing on a pipe made of green pipes. The much smaller boy grinned at him and put on red-rimmed aviator glasses, made sure his hat was properly on his head, and pointed at an almost large enough throne at the back. Predictably, the mech boys had wielded it together from scrap. It was all pokey and uncomfortable looking. "We're lifting right now, pleasure to fly with orcish rockets." The pilot mumbled around his pipe and began pressing buttons. The cockpit closed, and Gorguts hurried to secure himself. 3, the pilot said aloud. Gorguts cursed the diseased spores the pilot spawned from and sat heavily into the throne. It groaned under his bulk, and all scrap poked him in all the uncomfortable places. Something below them began to rumble ominously to make the day even better. 2, the pilot flipped a large red cover from an even larger red button. Gorguts held for dear life, cursing all the mech boys across the galaxy. 1. The world exploded and kicked Gorguts in the arse, then sat on his chest and tried to squash him like that Gretchen he stepped on before coming on board. The pressure made sure to poke scrap even deeper into his hide. "And we fly." The pilot waved a fist in the air, then continued to press colorful buttons. This was going to be a long and unpleasant flight. More than long enough for Gorguts Ed Hunter to swear vengeance upon everyone responsible for the rocket ride from hell. Ares Badlands Kronus, digging in the dirt like slaves. That was what Eliphas and his Astartes had to do while the sorcerers chanted, giggled, and screamed. One of the vital bastards fell to his knees and clawed out his eyes, babbling nonsense in tongues. "It burns, the light burns, he's watching us." That was all the Black Apostle could understand. After the earlier experience with the portal, it was more than enough. That rotting corpse on the golden casket still had some fight in him. That wasn't good, like at all. "Hurry, damn your souls!" Eliphas spat and redoubled his own efforts. Eventually, they hit black rock and excavated a massive slab of it, covering what had to be the entrance. It took all the Astartes' might, that of the sorcerers too, even the babbling imbecile, to move it. It was a slow and hard process, but they managed it, all the while venomously cursing their lot in life. With the chamber opened, the saner sorcerer led the way, checking for nasty surprises. There were a few wards to break, and in that regard, the crazy one proved invaluable. He opened himself to the warp and began burning in silver flames. Nevertheless, the true believer lasted long enough to overpower the first 2 defensive enchantments. The third required ritual self-mutilation to crack. It was only his altered physiology that allowed the remaining sorcerer to live long enough to get the job done. They finally managed to pass the short corridor leading into a small circular chamber made of the same black heavy stone as the slab outside. The last sorcerer croaked orders, spreading the willing sacrifices, including one of the Astartes, so they could form the necessary arcane symbol. Then he began to chant and opened his wounds. The sacrificed followed suit, and fresh blood freely offered, pooled in the ground, which drank it greedily. The sorcerer's voice changed, he choked and began to burn. The chamber shook, all light went out, and something powerful manifested inside. Inhuman fury clashed upon Eliphas, and only his experiences in the Basilica of Pain allowed him to retain a semblance of sanity. The remaining Astartes weren't so fortunate, and they fell upon each other with murderous intent. The screaming and chanting ceased. All save for Eliphas fell to the ground dead, and not a drop of blood remained in their bodies. "It's you." Something spoke through the sorcerer's throat. Burning embers stared at Eliphas from the scorched and otherwise empty eye sockets of the possessed corpse. The body was shifting and mutating in front of his eyes. Bones shattered and transformed, limbs stretched, the skin darkened until it was blacker than the chamber walls. Khorne wants the Inquisitor dead. The demon rumbled in eager anticipation. A monstrous maw leered at Eliphas from where the sorcerer's face used to be. But not today. A huge clawed paw closed around the Black Apostle, and reality shattered around them. They fell into the immaterium and slammed straight into a barrier of light. The demon roared at its searing touch, and Eliphas chorused its screams when the cleansing light bathed his tainted soul. Bridge rogue trader vessel, Luca Fedis, the warp en route to Kronus. The Luca Fedis tore itself from the warp in a surprisingly easy fashion. Too easy, really. Amberly held a weapon in death grip while staring at the navigator's alcoves. The senior navigator knelt in front of her, crying tears of joy from the corners of his eyes. Whatever happened a few minutes ago seared them shut and stunned everyone daring to glimpse at the immaterium. Despite the crippling injuries, the sanctified mutant was happier than Vale had ever seen one of their kind. He was in rapture. Nearby, Raquel was a little better. She had her trembling hands frozen in the sign of the Aquila and muttering prayers. Every few verses, she would smile happily and mumble something about beautiful divinity. The alcoves hissed open, and the replacement navigator stumbled out. A few were little more than drooling, laughing wrecks. Most had at least one eye sealed shut. The most coherent among the group turned to look at the gathered armed party pointing weapons at them. "The Emperor's light, it's beautiful," the woman declared. "It was like the sun bursting forth from Kronus, illuminating the darkness and searing away all the demons. Rejoice, it was a miracle. We beheld divinity, stared straight in the Emperor's light, and it was too much to bear." The navigator collapsed and fell into a peaceful slumber. The content smile never left her face. "I'm open for suggestions, Inquisitor," Captain Aurelius asked in a subdued manner that was nothing like his usual bearing. "Put them under quarantine and observation. At the first hint of trouble or taint, give them the Emperor's mercy." Amberly kept watching the navigators like a hungry bird of prey. "Contact Kronus and request a status update. We need to know what in the Emperor's name happened over there." Part 2. Bridge rogue trader vessel, Luca Fodis. The warp en route to Kronus. News from Kronus arrived slowly due to light speed lag. The faster options were out of the question. The locals lacked the necessary equipment, and the less said about the state of the astropathic choir, the better. Until very recently, the local warp had been chock full of so many demons that anyone listening would risk their sanity and soul for no good reason. Now, the warp apparently echoed with the dying screams of countless demons, which might have been music for the souls of those who could hear it. It was also a danger to the sanity of those psykers, but of no use as far as receiving timely information went. Nevertheless, what the happy astropath reported lined up with the claims of every other psyker on the ship. Amberly Vale was a particular chipper and upbeat woman for an Inquisitor. She was an optimist, a rare thing indeed, especially among those in her line of work. Her first reaction upon hearing the reports was logical: chaos, sorcery, and deception, probably caused by Slaaneshi demons. If the source was servants of the other three entities, their effect upon the psykers would have been different. It would have been much bloodier too. Time passed. No one suddenly mutated and tried to kill them all, or seduce and copulate with everything in sight. There was no mysterious sickness reported by the crew, no mutations. While people did die when something shook the warp, the cause was very obvious and blunt. That didn't stop Amberly from investigating and keeping her trusted people at critical locations, just in case. Yet, whatever treachery might be at work failed to manifest a result. They did arrive intact, and as far as anyone on board could determine, the Psykers haven't been tainted despite the very obvious injuries some of them suffered. We all are going to be in for a Malleus or Hereticus investigation on general principle. The Inquisitor whispered quietly enough that only the captain could hear her. Aurelius was back on his command throne so he could properly link up with the ship's systems and hear her machine spirit. He gave her a tiny nod. No anomalies. The transition to real space was the smoothest we have on record. Then we owe your navigators a case of their favorite drinks. If they don't end up shot just in case, Amberley didn't add. We're receiving data bursts from ships in orbit around Kronus. IFF matches, known Bloodraven units and Navy elements presumed to have reached the system before the warp disturbances began. Aurelius spoke mechanically while his eyes moved, seeing what the ship showed him. Update threat status. A Tau battle group is present in the system. Local forces believe several Eldar vessels are hiding in the outer system. Bieltan affiliation. Threat rating extreme. The captain's face tightened. He turned his head sharply and looked at Amberley. Necron forces confirmed on the ground. Necron ground-to-orbit weapon emplacements confirmed to be operational on the surface. All Orc space assets have been recently terminated. Amberley blanched at that news. Then and there, she didn't bother keeping a blank expression on her face. Then how are our naval elements still alive? Vale blurted out. She knew the Necrons, faced them in combat, barely got out alive. They were among the greatest threats in the known galaxy. Aurelius stared back at her, his expression mirrored her own shock. Warning to approaching rogue trade vessel. He spoke, citing something. Be advised, you're entering an active combat theater. Under the authority of His Majesty's Inquisition, Ordo Xenos, the Imperial forces on Kronus are in an active military alliance with the following Xenogroups. Aurelius paused to give Amberley a meaningful look before he continued whispering the contents of the message. Necron forces, under the command of the Necron Lord of Kronus. Eldar Expeditionary Force, under the command of Ranger Rohan, Affiliation Craft World Ulthwi. Do not fire upon allied Xeno forces without being engaged first. The captain stopped there, giving the Inquisitor a bit of time to digest the news. An alliance with Eldar, especially from Ulthwe. It was more common than the Imperium would like to admit, even though there were elements on both sides who would like to pretend such things never happened. It was a sad state of affairs that only Imperial authorities might shoot you, or worse for such an alliance. To the best of Amberley's knowledge, an Eldar working with humans might get some sneers and curses behind their back, at worst. And she was rambling because her mind was refusing to accept the idea that the Necrons of all species might consider a military alliance with the Imperium, no matter how fleeting. They were murderous machines with hard-to-fathom goals, responsible for the death of whole planetary populations. They never talked, much less wanted a peaceful resolution in any recorded encounter. What in the Emperor's name happened down there? There are active Imperial Guard, Naval and Commissariat codes. There is attached authorization by an Inquisitor Delcatar Vale, Ordo Xenos, using codes assigned to Lord Inquisitor Requista, Ordo Xenos. Aurelius added, I've met Requista briefly. He should have been on Kronus. Amberley frowned. They might be dealing with treason, an impostor, or a member of the Inquisitor's retinue doing their best after Requista have been killed. It might be all of the above. Some traitors genuinely believed they knew best, even without being compromised by outside forces. We're receiving data burst, properly logged reports on events that happened before our arrival. I'll make them available as soon as the data is scrubbed for unpleasant surprises. The captain continued. Amberley smiled briefly. This level of proper paranoia was one of the reasons why she had this ship, and more importantly, her captain, chartered as her usual transport. Have the reports sent to my quarters. I'll review them there, Captain. I'll appreciate it if we don't reach the planet before either powerful reinforcements can catch up and we know what we're walking into. Please inquire if the local forces need immediate assistance and about the situation on the ground. I already did, Inquisitor. I sent the request along with your identification package. And we're receiving another transmission. It's a message from the Bloodraven cruiser Armageddon. Amberley waited for cogitators and tech priests to scrub the data. Soon an image of an ageless man with visible augmentations appeared above the primary hololith. This is Captain Stephen Ignatius, shipmaster of the Blood Raven strike cruiser Armageddon. Your codes check, Luca Fodis. We've already apprised you of the situation in space. Bieltan forces are lurking around, and we're still considering them a threat. We have rough parity with the Tau battle group in orbit, and we're holding a defensive posture in order to protect our assets on the ground. A brief pause followed while the captain looked away from the camera. Good. Send a copy of the report to the Luca Foedis when it's ready. Ignatius looked back at them. The situation on the ground is complicated. About a week ago, Guard and Blood Raven forces engaged a massive Orc horde heading towards Victory Bay. We annihilated the Orcs with the help of orbital strikes. As soon as we broke the Greenskins, the Tau launched attacks upon our ground forces, while their naval vessels ensured we were in no position to offer support. Our ground assets managed to retreat in good order and reach secondary defense lines. Captain Ignatius grimaced. At that point, the situation got complicated. A Necron representative, the naval officer twitched when saying that, contacted us. Inquisitor Vale convinced General Alexander and Captain Thule that if nothing else, listening to the Xeno would buy us a bit of precious time. Long story short, the Inquisitor managed to broker an alliance with the Necrons after learning the Eldar Bieltan elements on the ground have ensnared the Tau and planned a joint attack upon Victory Bay. As he spoke, Ignatius's face became a curious shade of grey. Amberley could swear he hadn't approved of the alliance. Emperor be good. Her first reaction was to conclude the leadership of the local forces had been suborned, so she couldn't blame the man. She wondered how much the presence of the Necron ground-to-space weaponry changed the man's opinion of the affair. The attack the Necrons warned us of happening did occur. We were able to detect the Tau movements from space and track the Eldar thanks to sensor feeds provided by the aliens. The Tau battle group ensured we were unable to intercept the approaching forces from orbit. Doing so risked leaving our ground assets exposed to the still-present Orcish naval presence and the surviving elements of the Eldar fleet we engaged earlier in the campaign. This was becoming more interesting by the minute, more surreal too. Amberley was sure she was missing a lot of context and details. She hoped to find some of them among the properly filled reports. Our ground forces engaged and destroyed the Tau and Bieltan mobile units sent against Victory Bay. At the same time, Inquisitor Vale's retinue acted as bait for the Eldar Farseer, who led an assassination attempt against Imperial leadership on the ground. I'm unclear on the details, however, the Eldars were deceived and suckered into an ambush where an overwhelming number of Guard and Necron forces engaged and destroyed them. Sadly, the Eldar Farseer managed to escape. Captain Ignatius sighed. Contrary to my belief and expectation, the alliance with the Necrons persisted. Our combined forces turned their attention upon Chaos foothold in the Deimos Peninsula. As we speak, ground forces are preparing to launch a final assault, to annihilate the traitors and neutralize an active warp gate, which provided the enemy with a constant stream of reinforcements. By this point, Amberley wasn't sure what to think. What she knew was everyone on the ground was suspected to be subverted by Chaos, the Necrons, or the Eldar. She also knew that any reports from the surface were now suspect at best, outright fabrications at worst. One thing was certain, there was no way they would get into orbit without heavy reinforcements, and not just because of the Necrons. During the initial assault upon the Deimos Peninsula, the enemy launched a counterattack spearheaded by a demon host. Thanks to the Necrons deploying anti-warp countermeasures and the intervention of Inquisitor Vale's retinue, the demons were banished and traitor armored counterattacks smashed. We have reports from our ground assets that a demon entity, codenamed Skulltaker, manifested on the battlefield. It attempted the destruction of the Necron Lord we're currently allied with and the murder of Lord Inquisitor Vale. What we can confirm is that Bloodraven elements, the Inquisitor and his retinue, and the Necrons engaged the entity and banished it. We also have unconfirmed reports that a joint operation between the Inquisition and the Necrons testing experimental xenotechnology was underway. Its purpose was the permanent destruction of code-name Skulltaker. We do have supporting evidence that this might be the case. And Amberly wasn't listening anymore. She was staring at the hollow image of the Blood-Raven captain while her mind spun in circles. She needed Malleus and Hereticus assets in the system yesterday. A lot of them, and the reliable kind. She refused to believe that the local forces managed to kill something like that for good, even if they worked with the Necrons. This whole story sounded insane, and the fact that Captain Ignatius played along rang all kinds of alarm bells in Amberly's head. Captain Aurelius, keep us on a very slow approach towards Kronus. If someone asks, tell them we suffered damage due to warp disturbances, and currently we can't safely accelerate any faster. Inform me about the moment our reinforcements arrive in the system and apprise them of the situation. All local forces are potentially compromised. If they make any threatening moves our way, we'll consider them a clear and present danger to the Imperium. Chapter 13, Parts 3 and 4. Chapter 13, Revelations. Part 3, Inquisitor Vale's quarters. Rogue trader vessel, Luca Foodis the Warp, en route to Kronus. Amberly lounged on her bed, nursed one drink too many, and prayed to the Emperor that the universe would begin to make sense again. Thank you very much. Nearby, good old Caractacus sat on the edge of a comfortable wooden armchair, a gift from a minor noble who still held the delusion she might marry him. The savant muttered to himself, and the still flesh and blood parts of his face twitched constantly. The cause was obvious. He watched a certain infernal recording again and again. It had to be fake, Amberly told herself. All of this had to be some grand deception. She tried to reassure herself, otherwise the galaxy had gone even more insane than she thought possible. The official reports over the events from the past couple of weeks were bad enough. The Inquisitor didn't even have to read between the lines. Doing so was a critical skill when dealing with a large section of the imperial bureaucracy. The reports were painfully blunt, and the picture they painted, ugly. The Blood Ravens and the Imperial Guard under the command of General Lucas Alexander were on the brink of open warfare. The Astartes had shot up one too many guard unit for the general to hold back and take the abuse. Inquisitor Requista and his retinue had gone missing investigating rumors of heresy and treason in a region known as the Deimos Peninsula. That was the same place where Necrons, Eldar, and assorted Imperial forces were supposedly busy securing right now. They were just launching a final assault to destroy a Chaos Warp Gate. That was what the reports claimed. Reading that message nearly made Amberly giggle at the beginning of a bad, heretical joke. Nevertheless, it was supposed to be true. At least she now knew who this Inquisitor Del-Catar Vale was supposed to be. A green behind the ears acolyte supposed to join Requista's retinue as a sanctioned psyker. That much was reasonable. All the paperwork copies and codes Vale received from the Armageddon appeared genuine. However, what the man did next painted a very different picture. He managed to get the Blood Ravens and Imperial Guard to step back from the brink of utter foolishness and treason. After that, he convinced them to give him assets to go find Requista so the Inquisitor could officially order them not to kill each other. The sheer insanity of that statement was galling. It also lined up with the cry for help sent by General Alexander and the request for updated orders from the Blood Raven commander, a Captain Thula. If that was all, Vale's actions would be commendable and enough for a lot of Inquisitors to snag him into their retinues. Common sense was a rare and dangerous commodity these days. If you were able to make use of it, that was even rarer and better. Amberly giggled and drank some more Amasec. Anything not to think about how the insanity, tragicomedy, and sheer madness on Kronus ended. Because thinking about it made her head hurt, and she wanted to scream in frustration at the practical joke the Emperor had to play on everyone if it was true. Nope, not thinking about that right now. The blonde woman stared at the ceiling, which wasn't spinning yet. She wasn't drunk enough yet. Obviously. What did Vale do next? He stumbled upon a massacred settlement. Then he found a bunch of traitors and Inquisitor Requista who had been tortured to the brink of death and left to rot in the cells of the local Arbiter's HQ. If she didn't know any better, Amberly would think that Vale had worse luck than dear Caiaphas. Where was Cain when you needed him and his regiment anyway? The Inquisitor frowned in a moment of clear thought. Requista had been a good man. He didn't deserve what the traitors did to him. He was also a tough bastard to survive the torture and still cling to life when rescue came. Amberly could recall the recording from the Astartes' helmet cameras, from multiple sources too. Requista's brutalized form, his desperate last actions, and Vale's field promotion. That could have been either a genuine stroke of luck, a blessing from the Emperor himself, that Requista lived just enough, that Vale could get to him in time, or it could have been too neat a coincidence. A stranger just stumbled into inquisitorial post. He then proceeded to wield the power his new position granted him in ways that many in the Imperium would gleefully call outright treasonous and heretical. This all could be a long and twisted plot by Chaos. It sounded just like something a certain entity would be very happy to engineer. But there was that last recording Amberly didn't want to think about. There was a lot of supporting evidence too. However, that evidence might be mighty Chaos effort, or the Emperor making a very blunt statement in the hope that it might sink into the thick skulls of his servants. It was days like this when Amberly hated her life. Thinking of the source of her problems, she could recall watching Vale's more infamous exploits, riding a chimera to charge an orc war boss after volunteering to lead his hastily gathered retinue as a kill team. It was the proper idea from an Inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos, even if the execution lacked. She saw Vale's stunt, going up at the orc, even as blood ravens in Terminator armor swarmed it. The brute, unfortunately, survived teleporting away. Multiple recordings confirmed orbital strikes decimating the orc horde. Even more, evidence corroborated the Tau attack on the weakened Imperial lines, complete with Mechanicus sourced video of a wounded and incoherent Vale, engaging Kroot raiding party while Medicus attempted to evacuate him from a field hospital. Amberly had the nagging suspicion that she was going to have to decide if these events were of a legend in the making or a grand deception with an unknown aim, and that either choice on her part would earn her far more complaints than praise. The Necrons came next, and Vale couldn't help but be both excited and terrified. No matter the reason, those recordings were treasure troves for her Ordos. They had to survive and spread, even if people had to watch them with a few buckets of salt. This was the first time Amberly knew of Necrons deigning to speak with humans. Perhaps the first time they were capable of. She carefully studied everyone's faces and studied their reactions. Almost no one was happy at the alliance Vale wagered on. But the price of it, what the Necrons had and were willing to offer, that was simply too good to be true. It was an ideal bait, one that called to her like a siren's song. That was a great trap, she had to admit that much. Anyone in their right mind suspecting the presence of such technology on Kronus would be snared by it. It wasn't just the devices, but the schematics needed to build them that made it so enticing. She would risk a great deal to secure them. Any Inquisitor worth their rank would. Those pylons could be a game-changer. Vale saw that some of the Mechanicus contingent on-screen agreed, while others were particularly troublesome traditionalists. In light of this revelation, Amberly merely skipped through the reports covering the clash with the combined Tau Eldar force. It was a neat trap, one that was feasible to have happened due to the pylons. If they worked as advertised, she could see how a Farseer might stumble in their divination and let things go astray that much. Amberly drained her cup and discussed the merits of getting up to refill it. She glanced at a half-empty bottle in disgust and thought better of it. She had drunk enough, no matter if she wanted to be insensate soon or not. The next group of reports made the situation seem like a tangled ball of yarn. A different group of Eldars appeared then. They warned the local Imperial forces of a greater demon imprisoned on the planet, likely the heretic's primary objective. Vale allied with them too. Amberly couldn't decide if he showed commendable foresight or disturbing willingness to work with Xenos. That was saying something, considering her Ordo and how often she had to do precisely that. Contrary to what anyone sane would expect, humans, Necron, and Eldar failed to backstab each other and fought together against the traitors pushing them back. And it was then that sheer, pure insanity reigned. It made Amberly wonder if she managed to get either poisoned with something exotic, or perhaps someone clobbered her upside the head with a power weapon. Either that or one of the servitors running around the ship dropped a large box on top of her. Inquisitor Vale watched chosen footage from the battle against Chaos, the demon charge, an Emperor-damned Herald of Khorne, the most infamous one too, making an appearance. She watched the Necron Lord fight it to a near standstill, yet losing Inquisitor Vale's countercharge that followed. It was the stuff of legends. Acts like this one made people sector-wide famous champions of the Imperium. Usually they were very dead heroes too. This would have been the case with Vale too. He faced against the demons with a small group of guardsmen, Oghren, and a child of all things. What the madman thought, Amberly wouldn't know until she met him. And she would have to meet with all survivors and interrogate them. Carefully at that. She watched Vale and his commissar aide face against the Skull-Taker, and the demon began dismembering them, its preferred method of spreading terror before delivering a killing blow. Blood Ravens intervened, but only their librarian managed to reach the Skull-Taker and engage him. He was losing too, and then the Necron played their card. They teleported a monolith behind the demon horde, and Amberly was sure it contained more of their anti-warp tech. As soon as the tremendous lightning bolt that heralded its arrival dissipated, many demons fell, some bursting into fire. The Skull-Taker faltered and slowed down. It still refused to die, yet it was now on the back foot. Amberly watched the next section multiple times, had it examined by tech priests again and again for traces of forgery. There were none, just the usual filtering meant to keep people safe when viewing such things. She saw a child cripple a herald of Khorne, saw the wounded Inquisitor deliver a mortal blow to the demon, banishing it. She also read the critical report outlining the point of that suicidal attack. It was a field test of the Necron anti-warp tech. The test wasn't just about weakening demons and psykers, it was an attempt to kill the warp spawn outright. The state of the child as a blank was a part of it. Vale was certain of it. That explained her presence there. It took Amberly reading carefully through the lines to reach that explanation. At that point, she set aside her wine glass, opened her emergency Amasec cache, and began drinking in earnest. The first time Amberly went over the reports, she was ready to believe that this was it. Little did she know that there would be yet another strike against her sanity. Amberly glared at Mott. The man was fascinated by Vale's last stunt. Right now he watched the recording from the Inquisitor's Kazarkin bodyguards for the 10th time at least. He kept counting all the feathers on screen and was convinced there was a divine message to be found in their numbers. Feathers. Amberly blanched at the thought. She had the privilege of meeting an Imperial saint once. She would never forget their golden radiance, their beautiful feathered wings. She shook her head and winced as it caused a stab of pain. If there was even a hint of truth to those recordings, Vale, at the very least, received divine blessing from the Emperor. At worst, an Imperial saint on Kronus meant that the Emperor approved of the madness that bastard wrought. Now Amberly couldn't even proclaim everyone on the surface heretics and traitors, even if it turned out it would be for the best. That was supposed to be a good thing, but in this case, how could she explain all those reports and records without appearing compromised? That bastard had to grow a pair of huge glowing wings, didn't he? What was this, a ruin Amberly's day marathon? The Inquisitor closed her eyes, praying fervently that in the morning the world would begin to make a vague amount of sense. Amberly would awake too early, with a headache from hell and news that reinforcements just entered the system. Necron reinforcements. Part 4, Bridge, Necron battlecruiser, Reaper, en route to Kronus. Amarkan the Gatherer, Necron Lord of Fyria, Nemester of Neferu dynasty, found himself in a rare position. Pharaon Kefrek the Unbroken, the supreme leader of the Neferu dynasty, was still asleep. There was nothing in the directives left behind that required his premature awakening. Thus, Amarkan found himself with a rare degree of freedom. He also had an advisor, who helpfully reminded him of the less-than-stellar record Kefrek had back in the day. The dry words of Cryptek Tsar of tomorrow were almost prophetic. Tsar did warn that the planned long sleep had been too hastily implemented, that there were too many things that could go wrong in a mere million-year, much less the 60 they spent in hibernation. He wasn't alone in issuing those warnings, yet the Necron leaders ignored all such naysayers. The Nemester's old advisor and one-time friend had been more than right. In the days since Amarkan's awakening, the queries he sent to check the status of Neferu dynasty tomb worlds brought mixed results. Too many of those were unpleasant. Theory 1, the preferred one, was that their dynasty had been particularly unfortunate and hit harder than others by the ravages of time and rising primitives. Theory 2, the one Amarkun didn't want to ponder upon, postulated that they were among the lucky ones. If that was the case, the Necrons across the galaxy would be a crippled shadow of their former might. Such a development might require a novel approach if, for no other reason, they would lack the numbers to deal with old and emergent threats. That was one of the reasons why the Nemestor decided to answer the cry for help in person. He needed to see the status of other tomb worlds. He also had to find out why no one else confirmed answering the distress call. Surely the Neferu dynasty couldn't be the only one in a position to receive the call, much less answer it. Nemestor and Cryptek spent days talking about their past and the uncertain future they faced. Amarkun might not have been his former self, however. He could notice the direction his one-time friend was trying to push him at. Some statement was borderline treason, even if not quite. Yet how has he been to interpret it otherwise when Tsar used every opportunity to point the Pharaoh's faults in judgment and planning? When during discussions of past campaigns he kept hinting that alternative options might be better, options favored by the Nemestor? Was this a test, and if so, of what nature? Was Tsar Kefrek's creature now, or did he genuinely want to see a change in leadership, one that would lead to his own ascension from Cryptek to Nemestor and possibly planetary lord? Many questions were plaguing Amarkun. What they discovered during their journey to Kronus raised more. The Necron gate network was in disrepair. Automated systems that should have kept it fully operational and hidden had malfunctioned more often than not. While this time the Nemestor was fortunate, and he could use a gate close to the system in distress, that might not be the case if he wanted to reach other parts of the galaxy. That alone was a grave portent, and perhaps explained why no one else answered. They might be unable to get to Kronus in anything resembling a timely fashion. Amarkun refused to entertain the possibility that his dynasty and the Necrons on Kronus might be among the few of their kind left in the galaxy. He refused to accept the possibility of such a grand failure. The Necron fleet emerged from the gate into an unremarkable system, lacking anything useful to draw interested eyes. The galaxy was chock full of such places, giving ample opportunity to hide valuable infrastructure where it would be hard to find. The first thing Amarkun did after the jump had been to ping all sensor platforms in range and require threat assessment of the nearby systems. They were supposed to be full of useless rocks and dead worlds. That state of affairs hadn't changed during the long sleep. What did change was that only half of the platforms answered. Time had taken its toll upon them because no recorded burst transmissions were indicating hostile action. The Nemestor patiently waited for the fleet to form up. At the same time, the ships updated their databases with the current state of the local galactic sector, accounting for stellar drift and other phenomena recorded by the platforms. "What do you plan to do, Nemestor? I ask yet again, and once again you refuse to offer a clear answer." Tsar of Tomorrow kept prodding him. Amarkun shifted perspective from the Necron network to his eyes and turned his head to look at the Cryptek standing beside his command throne. "I gave you many answers," the Nemestor pointed out, "and each one was different from the one before." Tsar peered at Amarkun over his staff. "We lack information on the state of the galaxy, present threats, the state of the Eldari, the abominations, who or what is the dominant species of this day and age, and if they are a threat." Amarkun deadpanned. "This venture will give us answers." "And if those answers require a less than typical response?" Tsar prodded in his typical dry manner. There were brief moments when Amarkun was convinced that if he shut down his eyes when he switched them on, he would see his old friend in the flesh, that he would no longer behold the pale imitation of the real thing both of them had become. He shied away from that way of thinking. Nothing good came from it, ever. "We'll gather intelligence first." Amarkun's tone left no room for more arguments of that nature. He pushed his awareness back into the network and issued orders. Power built up, the warship's weight shifted until it became a negative number. Their engines came to life, accelerating them to high relativistic speeds, thus cheating the mundane laws of physics. On the way to Kronus, Amarkun kept pinging his local counterpart for intelligent summary and tactical assessment of the situation. While the distress signal kept its song, no updates came, no answers to the inquiries. However, while the fleet approached their destination, its sensors lit up with a warning. The insane dimension that gave the old enemy their powers and did the same for the Eldari was in turmoil. While on the approach, the fleet could detect merely ghosts of the powers involved, there was no mistaking it. The abominations were involved. They still existed in the far future, and that boded ill. The primary reason behind the long sleep was to outlast them. Cryptek, I want a beacon network set up in our wake. If we run into more than we can handle, I want the dynasty warned of what we will face, Amarkun ordered. This time, Tsar offered no dry quips in response. The Cryptek merely acknowledged the order through the network and went to oversee its execution personally. A few days later, after detecting the echoes for tremendous disturbances, the Necron fleet finally reached the outskirts of the system. They could detect several active sensor platforms that initially didn't acknowledge their presence. Amarkun rearranged his forces in a defensive formation and waited for the passive sensor to gather a rough picture when he finally received a transmission from Kronus. It was through short-range backup equipment, which might explain the silence. The Nemester answered the inquiry and once again repeated his request for information. This time, he got his wish. He still waited for defensive programs to go over the large data package and give the all-clear before devouring it. By the time he was done and sent it to his principal commanders to familiarize himself with the situation, Amarkun had stood at crossroads. He spent the short time Tsar needed to familiarize himself with the catastrophe engulfing the galaxy and put it to good use. He calculated options, simulated stratagems, and formulated plans. There was one inescapable conclusion. In hindsight, the long sleep had been a grave mistake, if only because the decadent Eldar outdid themselves, perhaps put the old enemy's greatest folly to shame too. Your thoughts, Cryptek Tsar, Amarkun demanded. Amarkun, I hope for all our sakes that you consider my hints. We both know the Pharaoh. He was inflexible and stuck in the past. We know what he'll order when he awakens. Tsar of Tomorrow spoke the hard truths bluntly. If what we are facing here isn't an aberration, but a picture of the average state of the galaxy, we won't have the numbers to act as in the old days. The human imperium might be decaying and dying, yet it is supposedly vast. They might have the numbers to cripple us if we try purging them. Their very existence might account for no one answering. You believe that Tomb Worlds awoke, tried to exterminate the primitives, and failed. Tsar didn't sound surprised by such a conclusion. They might have succeeded in neutralizing the local human presence, only to be swarmed afterward. It matters little in the end. An Eldari remnant is still active, and undoubtedly they're to blame for some tombs remaining silent forever. The abominations appear to be even a greater threat now. They saw the battle with that unnatural thing through the eyes of their fellow Necron. Superior technology and cunning won the day. But only with the aid of the humans, it had to be said. The mere fact that a single one of those things could outclass a Necron lord in single combat was more than concerning. It brought memories from the worst days during the war in heaven. What now, Nemestor? The Cryptek inquired. Remind me, Cryptek, do we have a standard procedure for negotiating with useful primitives who hate aliens on general principle? I don't recall anything like that being necessary. I don't either. We will lower the shrouds and make a slow approach towards Kronus. We will use the time gained to consult with the local Necron lord on how best to talk with the humans. Your foresight and grace are formidable, Nemestor. Tsar, you were never particularly good in imitating useless courtiers. Your dry wit ruins it. Just don't. Chapter 13, Parts 5 and 6. Chapter 13, Revelations. Part 5, Bridge Rogue Trader Vessel, Luca Foodis. The warp en route to Kronus. She took a pill of stimulants, downed a glass of water, and polished it with a fast walk to the bridge. Those three factors ensured that when Amberley arrived, she almost felt refreshed enough to be of use. The bridge was much calmer than she was, and the Inquisitor soon understood why. The main hololith displayed a crisp image of the system. Korava was in the lower right. The other stellar bodies hung around in the darkness, intercepted by ghostly lines showing their orbits. 7 pulsing red symbols hung in the upper corner of the hologram. A ring of early warning satellites deployed by the Navy some time ago detected their approach. We can identify 4 of the new arrivals thanks to the database you provided us with, my lady. Aurelius didn't bother with a greeting. 2 Dirge-class raiders and 2 jackals. They're light escort equivalents that can fend off cruisers. The other 3 are unknown configuration. Auspec's extrapolation leads us to believe the 2 larger vessels are built in the same general crescent configuration. A tech priest elaborated. They were nearly fused to the Auspec station, something Amberley could never get used to. The last vessel is much larger, an equivalent to one of our battleships or battle cruisers. Aurelius glanced at the Inquisitor. We have to assume the larger classes possess the same combat capability the escorts demonstrated according to the data you provided. That task force likely possesses the offensive and defensive capabilities to secure the system against everything we have locally and the closest reinforcements we're aware of. Those were a cruiser squadron, with its lighter escorts protecting the bulk of the relief force heading for Kronus. Best case, they were at least a day from reaching the system. Even if they were here, augmenting the ships already present, Amberley doubted they would be able to stop the Necrons. Inquisitor, my recommendation is to either turn away and run, or make the best speed to Kronus, evacuate anything you deem of value, and then execute a tactical retreat, the captain advised. How long until they reach Kronus? Amberley asked while thinking about a way of this mess. Was this system cursed? They're under low acceleration and will arrive a few hours after us. Aurelius gave her a patient look. Everything you've revealed about their capabilities tells us that they should be able of much higher sustained acceleration. If we go to Kronus, we might be unable to get away. No one mentioned that, with the state their navigators were, a safe jump anytime soon was out of the question. Go for the planet, best possible speed, Vale decided, hoping she wasn't condemning them all to death. We still need to figure out what in the Emperor's name is happening down there. By your command. Helm, flank speed. Comms, advise the naval forces in orbit of Kronus that we'll be making an emergency burn-in attempt to reach them before the Xenos. Aye, Captain. The tech priest froze and began to quickly chant in binary. We're receiving a transmission. Can't locate the origin point. The cyborg froze for even longer, and Amberley discreetly put a hand on her weapon. They're requesting to speak with whoever is in charge, while Inquisitor Vale is indisposed. Amberley opened her mouth, then closed it with an audible click that sounded deafeningly loud on the suddenly silent bridge. Even after going over all available records and seeing the camera feeds captured during those events, she didn't see something like this coming. She was still half convinced that she was being ensnared into a fiendish plot. Anything else would be too good and too insane to be the truth, all evidence to the contrary notwithstanding. Shall we respond? The tech priest eventually broke the oppressive silence. Amberley took a few moments to compose herself and bring her Inquisitor persona to the front of her mind. She schooled her face into a blank mask, straightened up, and nodded. Answer and send the following. This is Inquisitor Amberley Vale, Ordo Xenos. I am in charge. I am willing to talk. Bridge Necron battle cruiser, Reaper, en route to Kronus. The more they learned of the state of the galaxy, the less Amarkan liked it. A particular highlight was a short conversation he had with the planetary lord. The fellow had suffered much. He had lost portions of his memories during the long sleep, a fate that might have been theirs as well. While there was nothing in the databases at the Nemestor's disposal to identify his local counterpart for sure, there were traces in the transmissions from the planet, artifacts and security measures in the code, which pointed at this place being sworn to the Silent King's own dynasty. Possibly one of the many distant research outposts studying whatever took the Supreme Overlord's fancy at any given time. The lack of memories and directives might have been no mere incident or oversight. Instead, it could be a security measure in case of awakening without explicit summons from the Silent King himself. Or it could be entropy, wear and tear, caused by the countless years that separated this era from their own. More importantly, the locals appeared to be sane, at least by the dubious standards of the times, at least the Necrons. They were even willing to exchange technology and resources for aid. That did point at the place being a research outpost and the lost memory actual damage instead of design. We will discuss restitution later. Amarkon had decided to appear benevolent. He would still hold the orbitals if he needed to be less, how to put it, nice, in the future. What can you tell me about the humans and other aliens you've made contact with? The answer had been enlightening and startling in equal measure. The primitives were insane. There was no other logical explanation. It was just that there was a great deal of them, and some were insane in a potentially useful fashion. Amarkon found it darkly amusing that in their disposition, many human unwittingly emulated his own people when they still had flesh and blood, instead of necrodermis. It was an attitude that would earn them the fury of many a Necron overlord and lady. Amarkon chose to consider it amusement and carry on with his plans. The more he knew, the more his strategic predictions firmed up. They didn't paint a pretty picture, certainly not one his late wife would have enjoyed. He paused at that odd stray thought, wondering why it occurred to him before refocusing on the subject at hand. Most humans are extremely xenophobic. Conclusion, after observing the local variety. The reason is a combination of extensive propaganda, indoctrination, and the presence of multiple hostile alien races assaulting the human realm. Proof: a large number of humans on Kronus aligned with alien species classified Tau. Secondary proof: Inquisitor Del Qatar Vale, willing to work with us. Tertiary proof: Inquisitor Del Qatar Vale, willing to work with Aeldari subfaction, based on Craftworld Ulthwé, shortly after engaging in combat with Aeldari subfaction from Craftworld Bieltan. Conclusion: higher-placed elements within the human hierarchy might be more open to the ideas of negotiations and working towards mutually beneficial goals. Counter-argument: any such deals might be subject to change depending on internal political pressures and blind fanaticism. We need additional data to reach a better conclusion. After examining all available data, Amarkon and Xar decided that their best option to open negotiations would be to contact the humans. It would be best to seek more members of the faction Inquisitor Vale belonged to. If they shared similar goals and worldview, the Necrons might be able to deal with them in a less wasteful manner. I am Inquisitor Amberley Vale, Ordo Xenos. I am willing to talk. The Nemestor looked at a human female in a body-hugging black suit. She had a mop of yellow fur on her head, which had to be very uncomfortable. Aliens. I am Amarkon the Gatherer, Necron Lord of Fyria, Nemestor of the Neferu dynasty. He proclaimed proudly, using the Necron name for the planet he ruled over. There was no need to give the humans any more information than needed, especially at this stage. The primitive stared at him, basking in his dubious magnificence. It was like she was seeing a Necron able to speak for the first time. Are you malfunctioning, Inquisitor Amberley Vale? Amarkon inquired. It wouldn't do for the human to break down at such an inappropriate time. I am undamaged, Nemestor Amarkon. Is that the right mode of address? The female shook herself and quickly answered. Most definitely not. Xar shot at him through the network in mock offense. She should be groveling at your magnificence. All things considered, there were many benefits to necrodermis bodies, like the impossibility to display unfitting facial expressions during negotiations, when someone like Xar of Tomorrow provided his inimitable brand of commentary. It is Inquisitor Vale, Amarkon graciously offered. Are you ready to negotiate? If the data gathered by the locals was correct, the human appeared surprised, if not stunned by his words. Yes, Nemestor Amarkon, we would definitely like to negotiate. The human confirmed. That was a good start, right? Amarkon wondered and asked his old friend for advice. That's one way to put it. Xar agreed. Something told the Nemestor that the cryptech might have been a tad sarcastic in his response. It was the long-suffered experience, he was sure of it. First, the current relationship. Does the military alliance negotiated by Inquisitor Del Qatar Vale still stands? That had to be a good starting point, surely. It has worked so far, despite how unlikely it was. Xar voiced his agreement. To the best of my knowledge, there have been no altercations between Imperial and Necron forces since Inquisitor Vale was incapacitated. The human female carefully responded. Was she trying to evade responsibility, or perhaps she had less control over the situation than she wanted them to believe? I see. In that case, we will consider it a gesture of good faith, if Inquisitor Vale could join us in the negotiations as soon as he is able. He has been one human who has proven we can trust his word. I would like to hear his input on any terms we might agree upon. Making use of a known factor was better than blindly dealing with one unknown. That would remain true during negotiations with aliens as well, wouldn't it? Your insight is astounding, Nemestor, Tsar sent at him. Did he let his thoughts leak into the network? That was sloppy security. Amarkon ran a diagnostic program and returned his primary focus to the human. I will see what we can do about this request. I won't be able to tell for sure until I reach Kronus and meet Inquisitor Vale in person. Understandable. The humans were still a primitive species with all kinds of limitations the Necrons could easily ignore at a whim. That was something to pity them over, he guessed. Part 6. Deimos Peninsula. The final assault upon the traitors and heretics was finally underway, and the enemy resistance was underwhelming. Small groups of berserkers eager for bloody death, demon engines and the occasional profaned dreadnought made a stand. They tried to slow down the sword of righteous justice that was a long time coming for them. It wasn't enough. Any strong point turned into a magnet for artillery and the personal attention of Necron monolith. Green lighting lashed at enemy positions, reducing weapons and fortifications to a smoking ruin. Screaming cultists fell where they stood as little more than charred skeletons. Here and there, individual units went on suicidal charges to be gunned down by the marching Necron forces, blown away by agile destroyers, or singled out by Imperial armor. It was a pleasant change to see such an assault where Imperial infantry didn't have to purchase victory with mountains of bodies and rivers of blood. This time, only veteran forces were on the battlefield, outfitted with the best available equipment. Their only job was to keep enemy anti-tank teams away from the vehicles. There was no need for expensive assaults upon fortified positions. An ever-increasing swarm of Necron drones provided an unprecedented level of battlefield intelligence that almost made Captain Thule envious. Smaller insect-like swarms braved the warp-infused top of the plateau, shredding enemy light infantry and acting as spotters for long-range bombardment. There was only one last lightly defended position, and they would reach the top. Then the target would be both in sight and range. A shroud of darkness enveloped the last traitor bastion. A couple of seconds later, it dispersed as light mist blown away by the wind to reveal the Necron Lord surrounded by a large retinue of heavy infantry right behind the enemy position. Gauss weaponry aimed with machine precision and cut through the defenders while they were still trying to figure out what was happening. At the same time, over 100 destroyers charged up the slope, firing all the way. Up and at them! Victory is at sight! Thule roared. He wouldn't let the Necrons claim they won the day alone. Imperial armor rumbled and ponderously charged at the heretics. Tactical squads advanced at a brisk pace without letting it influence their accuracy. They used missile launchers and plasma guns to good effect. The final defense line lasted 3 minutes under the onslaught before crumbling. It survived that long only because it contained a number of demons hiding in order to spring one last surprise. Large clumps of diseased flesh covered by pustules and open sores, rose from trenches. They ran out of burning bunkers or even dug themselves out of the ground to attack the Necrons. Captain Thule grimaced at the thought of facing those things in close combat. Any breach in the armor would mean a long and unpleasant recovery for an Astartes, and no guarantee they would make it. A normal human exposed to those things. The Emperor's mercy might be the only option if their armor was compromised. The Necrons didn't care. They blasted the diseased demons to pieces. A handful almost reached the Necron Lord and the small group of guards surrounding him, only to splatter all over them when shot. The Necron Lord looked at the smoking viscera covering him, and lighting arced all over his group. When it dissipated, he stood a few meters away from his previous position, still surrounded by the deadly honor guard. There was no trace of the disease-ridden viscera to be seen on any of them. That Captain Thule did envy. He didn't want to think about how long any human participating in the assault would spend under quarantine. He wanted to think even less about the fate of too many good men and women. When the Inquisition arrived in force to deal with this madness, it might be inclined to purge many of those who survived assaulting this chaos-infested wasteland. The demons achieved one thing. They slowed the advance of the Imperial forces until the place where they died could be liberally doused in a blessed fire. The Necrons didn't care. They either marched through the fires, ignoring them, or simply teleported to the top. "Assault Marines, with me. We're ending this," Captain Thule ordered. When he received confirmation from his jump pack-equipped brothers, he activated his pack and rocketed over the battlefield. The top was barely in range from his position, but he made it with a safe margin to spare. No defense fire came to meet him. There were no enemies to fight. All surviving enemy forces were clustered near the portal at the far end of the plateau, fighting to get through. Necron drones swarmed them, and constant explosions ravaged the traitors. More and more Necron infantry appeared in flashes of green, corralling the enemy and slaughtering them with practiced precision. A wave of destroyers rose above the last traitor bastion, followed by a handful of Eldar Grav tanks. Rohan the Ranger rode on top of the leading machine, which soon took a position for long-range bombardment and unleashed its exotic weaponry. It was all over but the screaming. Even the warp-infused structure of the warp gate couldn't survive the onslaught for long. Whatever unnatural sorcery kept it open and protected it had a limit. Slowly but surely, its spiky surface began to crack or melt before imploding. The rippling vortex of madness at its heart spluttered, cutting in half the last group that managed to fight its way to dubious salvation. The portal to insanity close, leaving behind about 10,000 or so traitors, heretics, and mutants. Spread among their mass, Thule could see the odd traitor Astartes. Those tried fighting their way out of the mob, probably seeking death in combat. It was not to be. Earthshaker rounds smashed into the crowd, pulping it. The Baneblade climbed on the plateau, appearing like a demon for a moment. Blessed fires covered the tank, which turned its massive turret at the enemy, and the battle cannon roared once, sealing the end of the unclean. The end was brutal and efficient, leaving the Imperial forces as little more than spectators. That allowed Captain Thule to observe their allies, count their numbers, and reach a predictable conclusion. The Necron had enough operational forces in the Deimos Peninsula alone to make combat with them unfeasible. He knew that they were still busy awakening more of their kind. He hoped Imperial reinforcements would arrive soon. Very heavy reinforcements at that, protected by strong Navy element, because otherwise they might not bother. Truth be told, the Blood Raven was expecting an inevitable stab in the back by the Necrons. They no longer needed Imperial assistance, and perhaps it was time for it. Another flash of green, and the Necron Lord was nearby, walking towards them, followed by 8 large guards. This was it, wasn't it? "All units, on this frequency, prepare for fall. I say again, prepare for fall contingency," the captain announced for what little good it would do. He tightened his grip on his weapons and prepared to pounce. "Rejoice, human," the Necron announced, "because being ready to slaughter us should make us happy." Thule sneered under his helmet. "Our respective reinforcements are in the system," the Necron announced, momentarily taking aback the captain. In their infinite wisdom, they have decided to talk. Thule expected everything to go straight to hell as soon as reinforcement arrived. He certainly didn't expect them to do something as outlandish as to try to negotiate. Ing with the Xenos. That was just Inquisitor Vale being odd, inexperienced, and kind of crazy, right? Besides, it was an act of desperation. We won't be shooting at each other today. There was no mistaking it. The Necron was enjoying himself. What say you, Ranger Rohan, of the Aeldari? What treachery are you plotting now? Rarely, Rohan has been more grateful for the full face-covering helmet typical to his station. He was relieved and almost happy that the humans and Necrons couldn't see his expression. He screamed in the privacy of his mind. Were the humans insane? More insane than usual anyway. What about the Necrons? What did those murdering machines have to gain from this? Was the Necron Lord lying? Affirmative, the Blood Raven captain nodded. I just got word from Captain Ignatius. An inquisitorial ship is in the system. and the Inquisitor on board is currently negotiating with the commander of a Necron naval battle group approaching Kronus. The human said aloud and relaxed a fraction. At that, everyone turned to look at the Aeldari. Rohan was keenly aware of how outnumbered his small contingent was. If it was just the humans, and he felt particularly foolish, engaging them might have been an option. Hit-and-run tactics, to dismantle them from range and avoid facing their might directly. Waging war against the Necron juggernaut, awakened on Kronus with what he had available, was out of the question. Our work here is almost done. Before leaving, I would want to witness the disposal of the demon bound within the Ares Badlands. Rohan was proud of how calm and composed his voice sounded. It reflected nothing of what he felt inside. That might be acceptable, the Space Marine allowed warily. Another test is in order. The Necron agreed, while its soulless eyes stared at Rohan. What about this region? It's corrupted. Another test. We're building multiple pylons. It would be educational to observe their effect upon the area once deployed at full power. Rohan wanted to be as far from this cursed peninsula as possible when that happened.